Okay, well, first of all, everybody, welcome to the Functional Tennis webinar. It's a new series we're going to provide, I don't know, for the next 6 months maybe. We'll try and do a webinar every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on when guests are available, and also try and change the time to suit people all over the world. But thanks for dropping by. Our first guest is Mr. Kris Soutar. He's a master performance consultant. He's works with the LTA, works with Tennis Scotland. He's worked with the Judy Murray and her foundation, and he's done a lot of great things for tennis. So really excited to have him on and talk about track and tennis development. And for anybody, we're going to have questions and answers at the end, and you can leave them in the Q&A box. We have our moderator, Keen, will help out making sure we can try and answer as many questions as we can. So I'll move it on to you, Kris.
Yeah, perfect. Right, I will share my screen and I will start. So thanks very much for tuning in, giving up it is Thursday night, isn't it? Yeah, so I am going to talk about tracking player development in this 10 to 14 age group. And the reason why I am keen on this is that we all know as coaches that as a tennis coach and a player, our biggest, and you could say our only commodity is time. And I believe that if we're going to work hard, we need to work smart. And working smart is making sure that we are tracking to a degree what is going on in a focused area. So what you see tonight will be 10 different areas that you could track within the 4 performance factors. And then there's an 11th big one around the kind of whole thing, which you'll see in a second. But for me, it's really important that we don't leave things to chance and don't feel that you have to focus on all of these areas. As you watch and listen, you might think that gravitates more towards what I think and what I believe, or it might be, I do this really well and I maybe don't do this at all. Maybe you need to start monitoring this. In terms of the monitoring, I unashamedly will say that there's going to be a mix of subjective and objective, because I think, you know, we can measure virtually anything, but I think we need to have subjective scoring because it helps us as coaches and the players reflect. And when you reflect, you quite often are in a learning zone without realizing. So I deliberately use subjective marking or scoring, grading, whatever word you want to use. And the why of this particular title is really, this is going to be super fast, and it's not going to be about literally how you do the development, but inadvertently you'll see how you could. So that I deliberately chose tracking versus just player development in the 10 to 14 age group. So we're going to get going. In terms of my objectives, I'm going to raise a few considerations at the start. I don't know if there's any parents on the webinar at all, but quite often this will overlap into parents as well. So a few considerations. The main thing is going to be this variety of components that we can use to track and develop a player, but also how they overlap. You all know as coaches how things like technical and physical overlap, that mentally, you know, everything is encompassed within the kind of performer aspect. So, you know, I think those are the areas that we really need to nail, is the overlaps and not just each individual component. In terms of the key considerations for this age group, you'll see over here on my cursor, these two lads are less than 1 year apart in age. So in this 10 to 14 age group, you can get kids that look like adults. And Ben on the left here is one of GB's best players. He won 12 and under Orange Bowl tail end of last year, our national champion, fantastic player, great tennis brain, he's got wheels on him, he can move big time. But this guy is less than 1 calendar year older than him. So I think this is a massive consideration we have to have in this age group. We can have kids that are literally just above the net, and we can have kids that we're actually looking up at. The second consideration, and for me this is a bit of a kind of a trend that I'm starting to see, which is that people seem to be thinking that moving from green ball to yellow ball is almost like going from primary to high school. And I deliberately use the school age or the class age when I work with coaches, because it makes them think a little bit more about what they're working with or who they're working with. So for example, my daughter would be a green tennis player, but she's in primary 5. She's still a baby. I know the level of work that they're doing at school. And sometimes when I watch tennis coaches working with players 9, 10, 11 years old, I see the type of mentality or education they're trying to bring, the awareness of emotionally or psychologically, and quite often they're not ready for that. So I think we have to be mindful of that. Likewise, at the tail end of the age group, when they're going 14 plus, like first year 16s, 18s, they're not going junior to senior, they're still kids. So I think we need to think of this window as exactly what it is, which is a huge development window. Quite often when you think about player development, a lot of people think that it's like the mini tennis is to get all the foundations laid, which of course it is to a degree, but I see the 10 to 14 age group as where you really will cement those significant fundamentals that you can lay on top if they have aspirations to go further with their tennis journey. As I mentioned already, there's a lot going to be in here, but each one of these components, for those of you that know me, I could speak or talk tennis all day, all week, all month. So there will be very much just an overview, and I will be going very, very fast paced, but we'll have time at the end to do a bit of Q&A and use the chat function to get your questions in as well. Don't worry too much about taking this in. I'm more than happy to turn this presentation into a PDF. I'll send it to Fabio and he can send it out to you. But these, as we see, we've got the 4 performance factors: technical, tactical, physical, and I've deliberately called this performer, and I'll speak more about that later on. But you'll see all around it is the person, which for me is, as much as a lot of people think it's cliche, 100% we cannot ignore the fact that we're coaching a person tennis. So we've got all the 4 factors, we've got the person wrapped around it, and I've got 10 components in here that I will give an overview on how they work individually, but also how they overlap. So I'm deliberately going to start with technique. Without getting too philosophical about it, each performance factor, let's just say for a principle, they are all equally as important. But a lot of tennis coaches get very ground down with technique. They kind of get almost obsessed with it, and they're constantly tweaking it and changing it. For me, I would liken the technical work in 2 categories: efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency being literally based around biomechanical principles. So the 3 things we want it to be repeatable, we want it to be robust under pressure, and we want it to provide, I'll call it easy power for a lack of a better expression, but it's just, that is efficiency in a nutshell. Minimum input, maximum output. What I would think of this in terms of tracking is what I would call their core forehand and backhand serve, and maybe the 2 volleys if you want to go down that road as well. So when I say core, I'm meaning like forehand and backhand rallying up and down the court to their tempo norms. And what I would do is analyze the 4 different parts of each shot, which for me are the end of preparation, the start of the hitting, and the finish. But I don't want to start talking about that. We could be here all night if I go into detail about that. But those would be my 4 checkpoints. And within each of those checkpoints, I would check out the racket work, the body work, and the leg work or the footwork. And really within that assessment or analysis, I would mark it out of 10 or RAG rate it. So RAG is red, amber, green, or gold. Quite often I would do the both at the same time. So I might say red is 1 to 3, amber is 4 to 6, green is 7 to 9, and gold is 10 out of 10. Now, the thing about going gold and the thing about technique is, you'll know yourself, in this age group, especially boys, they can get a little bit idiosyncratic and they get a little bit styly. So it might be that you rate preparation of the racket work a 10 out of 10. They watch team play and the next week they come in and they're giving it all this. So just know that you have to consistently check in to make sure that these techniques are still within an acceptable range of efficiency. So that would be something I would track through video analysis, checklists, etc. Quite easy to do, but I think it's important you dip in and do it regularly. For me, I would say the effectiveness is, I'm going to say, a little bit more important, because we all know that players can have idiosyncratic technique. They can be outside the range of acceptability. but due to their physicality and their eye hand, they actually just time the ball well. They can do magical things with the ball based on these skills that they have. So for me, effectiveness is the skill that they have to implement and use that efficiency. Now, what we're really looking to do there is create, world-class norms, within a controlled kind of core drill situation. Therefore, I use a selection of core drills, which are the metrics are timed and scored, and we do it fairly regularly to check in, because when we're working with good level performers, we need to maintain and develop. A lot of people think it's like, oh, that's our tempo, we bag it, and we just, we move on to something else. You have to constantly monitor these things, because people will get sloppy. They will go through maybe growth spurts, which make them a little bit less coordinated. So I use a selection of drills. I'm not precious about what the drills are, but the key thing is that they're timed and they're scored, and we can actually keep a record of how they're progressing there, and that helps with confidence as well. This is one example. I won't spend too long on this, but you could have 6 or 7 different examples. This is a tempo test, which essentially is you rally for 1 minute, and one of the players counts the total number of hits, and the other player counts the total number of mistakes. Now, in my opinion, mistakes should sting. And this is one of the things that we need to kind of integrate into practice. We don't want the players going crazy when they make a mistake, but it should hurt. It should irk them when they make a mistake. So what I do is I multiply the number of mistakes by 5, and I subtract it off the total score. So the example I've given here is 2 players. Let's imagine decent level 10, 11-year-old will probably hit 30 to 34 balls in a minute with a like-minded partner, and pretty easily. If they make 30 balls in 1 minute and we make 4 mistakes, multiply 4 by 5, it gives 20. Their score is really only 10. So it kills people when they do that. If they make a mistake, it really irks them. So you can use whatever scoring system you want, but I do believe that we should have some sort of consequence to making a mistake, because that adds pressure, and that's when you start to see the real tempo. In this drill, they're doing it cross-court with recovery. And I think, hopefully you can see my cursor, this player has to hit to the left of this like marker here. They have to hit to the left there, because if they're hitting up here, that's in the middle. Yeah, so a lot of people, when they do traditional cross-court drills, the ball might land here and they say that's cross-court. It's not. That is literally straight up the middle to the player. It needs to be crossing almost this junction of the sideline and the baseline for me to be considered a cross-court. So we do it on the forehand side, we do it on the backhand side, and you'll see down here a few different training habits that you could write down that you're observing for the qualities. So again, this is tracking. Are they split stepping at the right time? Are they using the appropriate split step? Are they breathing to create muscle relaxation? Also, slight aside, everyone seems to think that breathing out creates relaxation. It doesn't. It helps with it. You can breathe out and still be tense in the body. So they need to have that kind of disassociation in the body, the segmentation, to use fancy words. Do they maintain athletic height? Do they beat the bounce, which means they get set up behind the ball before it bounces or on the bounce? Do they win the recovery? That means they get back to the position before the opponent hits the ball. Do they use the appropriate use of the mechanics, whatever it is, a hop on the outside foot, an athletic hop if they have to move? It could be a jump and turn if they get behind the ball. It could be a whole host of different things. So between the technical efficiency and technical effectiveness, we have the sweet spot of, can they use their technique? Can they produce repeatable quality over and over to target areas, etc.? And there's a million different drills you could use to monitor that. Going into the tactical, to split it into almost like, for easiness, under 12 and over 12, I would use the percentage tennis model. So pretty much I would monitor what they are like in all the game situations of serve, return, both back, at net, and when the opponent's at net. For various players, you would prioritize more time at different things. I'm not going to spend heaps of time working when the opponent's at the net with a 10-year-old if the opponent only comes to net 3 or 4 times in a match. So serving and return both back take up the biggest slice of the pie. But what I want to know is or understand is the player's ability to play high percentage tennis within those game situations. Tactically, that is the foundation for any player. It doesn't matter what level you play at. If you are consistently playing low percentage tennis, you're not winning. You have to have a base of percentage and then start to use your weapons to take bigger risks, to force your game style onto your opponent and so on. But in this 10 to 14, we want this base of percentage tennis. And again, to start with, I would just rag rate them or mark them out of 10. But over time, you can start to develop like a kind of drill, percentage tennis drills within your training court that you could start to give a little bit more objective scoring. But most importantly, you want to start to take the information from the practice, the match court. So this is where I spend a lot of time preaching, if that is probably the right word for what I do. But I really, we're in an era now where it's becoming harder and harder for us to watch our players compete for various different reasons, safeguarding, cost, loss of business, etc. But I 100% believe that if you're in performance coaching, you need to see your players compete regularly for various different reasons. But from this context, you need to see them compete to know that if they're playing those high percentage points when the pressure comes. It doesn't matter when everything's free and easy. If they get to the big scoring pressures or fatigue or whatever, and they start playing too hard or too safe, which is a human reaction, then we need to know that. So you can start to actually grade them a little bit more objectively if you actually get the match charting information. Of course, there's going to be correlations in technique. I'll give an example in the next slide. But going on to the game style development, 12 plus, we saw earlier on the difference between Ben and the tall lad that he played. We can base emerging game styles on physicality, personality, and also their skill set. So I think you need those three things to kind of have a solid projection before you can actually start to really definitely say, right, you're going to be more likely an aggressive baseliner versus a counter puncher, a big server with a big forehand, a defensive baseliner. Hopefully you don't want to develop too many of them. It's pretty hard to win, male and female at any level when you get to that 14 plus if you're a defensive baseliner. But what you want to have is a kind of a priority list, potential weapons, and then you start to chart from the match court how often they use them. So I can give one example. I used to work with a young girl, Joanna, who was at 11 years old, almost 6 foot, but she played too defensively. So it was clear she was going to be 6 foot plus. She was strong. She timed the ball beautifully, and she was playing from too far back, and she was playing too passively. So we identified the serve, the forehand, or backhand early line was mint as well. So we just took those three things and we charted the percentage of time she showed it, she displayed it, and then the effectiveness of it. And we used those metrics just consistently over the next 2 or 3 years, and she could start to see percentage of points one went up on her serve, percentage of the amount of aces, unreturnable serves went up. When she was tight to the baseline, the percentage of times she was in an attack phase, the metrics went up. Her backhand line was starting to kind of go out of sight purely because she had this clear identity of what she was going to play like when she was older. And these are great for setting performance goals before matches. So you can start to really talk about the patterns on the serve. You can start to, get the player to really pick 2 or 3 areas. Right, I want to really be dictating with my forehand off ball 3. I want to dominate the middle as much as I can after my first serve. And then they can evaluate based on how they performed. And if we're there, we can actually give them the factual information. But for me, this has to be tracked consistently. So you see statistics getting used. For me, it's not statistics from one match. It's statistics from 10, 20, 30, a year worth of matches that you need to show the player to get them to believe that they're actually on the right track. In terms of just one visual, this would be a common thing I see that I could relate back to that point about the technical and tactical starting to be shown from the effectiveness, the core drills, to the match core. So let's say you don't have to worry about all this, but the color coding is red is the serve, yellow is the return, and green is ball 3. So if we have a situation where the serve has been effective out wide and the return is defensive-ish, and the player could get into this zone of the court, we want them to attack the ball down the line with power. But you see, and I see this a lot in the under 12 age group, that after serve, they don't set up well enough and they naturally hit the ball back to the same place. So if you chart that one thing with the 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, you'll be amazed how many times they could have changed down the line, but they actually go back cross court. And it's nothing about, their tactical decisioning. So they're too square on, they're too, they're too eager to hit the ball, so their contact's too far in front. They don't position or set up well, and so on. Now, just to give you this, and you can look at this when I send it on later on, this for me is how the percentage tennis starts to unwrap. So for example, if that was an effective pattern, they could approach the net and knock off the volley, or they might get an easy ball to put away on an overhead. That would be ideal. Of course, ideal is a winner, but we never train for winners. The next level could be they dominate with that forehand on the next ball. So it might be they hit here, player moves from here to here, defends more kind of middle third, this player recovers around, and they then continue to dominate from that middle third into the outside thirds. It could be that the player hits a cross-court ball and this player moves here and then takes the next ball early down the line. It could be that that player unfortunately gets behind the ball because it wasn't penetrating enough and they hit a rally ball cross-court, and then my player has to hit a rally ball cross-court. Or it could be this ball was ineffective, the player gets behind it, spanks it cross-court, and now all of a sudden my player has to neutralize. So think of those as layers, and within each of those, there is a high percentage A, B, C, D, E, etc. option. Under pressure, it's amazing how many players will play C, D, and E instead of A or B. So that's the type of thing that we can track over time. Moving on to the physical, this is probably an area that a lot of people are surprised when they see this into this type of presentation. But in this age group, it is amazing how many players, even by 10 years old, will have physical imbalances and therefore have to do physical adaptations to compensate for them. So all we're talking about here is getting a good solid understanding of where the player's at in their own body. And it's things like, can they hold a lunge? Is the knee over the toe? Is the pelvis aligned? Does the playing shoulder, even in 9-10-year-olds already, I'm seeing that players have got their right shoulder starting to go forwards and drop down. So that's going to impinge on things like the serve. You're starting to see pelvis tilting out quite a lot. So that's going to impinge in firing through the glutes. There's lots of physical things here that the bottom line is, and we know this as coaches, your body will not allow you to do anything it's not comfortable or capable of doing. Your body and your brain's first function is to survive. So in real terms, in a tennis match, you can tell your players technically what to do over and over and over. If the body is not capable of doing it, it won't do it. So you're wasting your time going down the technical route if it's a physical adaptation or imbalance that's on display. If you can't get access to a physio, you can go online and get these screening. They're really simple. I'm not a physio by any stretch of the imagination, but I could do a reasonably good overview of a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old by just seeing them in different positions and understanding what I'm looking for. Then we get them on a simple home program to try and correct these things. It doesn't have to be big. It could be 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day every single day is better than going to see one strength and conditioning once a week for 60 to 90 minutes. These things need to become habits so we can track that and put things in place to actually show progress in that way. For me, this is probably the biggest switch I had in my coaching when I was maybe about 26, 27. Fortunately, that's 21 years ago now. When I started working with the Scottish Institute of Sport, and they were educating me on this type of stuff, how to screen and so on. I could not believe. I remember one player that I worked with, Claire. She was one of the best in Scotland, and she could not do a side lunge and hold her knee over her foot. Her glute was inactive and her leg was bouncing all over the place. Then when I was hearing this, I'm like, of course, when she's out wide, she really struggles on that ball. 10 weeks later, she was playing Tennis Europe in Edinburgh, and she was sliding on that outside foot on clay and doing like an athletic hop off that foot and then pushing back in within 10 weeks, just by doing a simple home program, checking into the gym once a week with the strength and conditioning coaches. So it's such a vital thing. It is such a good investment of money, because imagine your players are spending, I don't know, £30 an hour plus getting constant individual lessons, where you could have done one screening for maybe £40-50, and that solves a lot of technical issues, or creates a good foundation to build technique on top of. In terms of another thing that I would track would be their strength. Now, mostly under 12, you'd be talking about their own body strength, but then maybe if they're 13, 14, girls especially can start to load weight a little bit earlier than boys. But the most important thing is this transition of, think of this as like a drop-down menu. Can they hold positions? Can they go through those positions through a range of movement? Can they produce power and skill out of those positions? So take the one I just mentioned with Claire. If she could not hold her outside lunge, there's no chance that she's going to be able to move and then hold and come out of that position. There's no chance. She's very skillful, and that's why she was getting out of it. So she was actually managing to use the hand a lot, but she was not using her whole kinetic chain. So we identify these things and we start to track them, and you could relate them to physical tests like a height on a standing broad jump. So that's triple extension through the ankle, the knee, the hip, extension, explosive power. You can touch the wall, mark it, and you can do simple things like this in terms of tracking the development of the players. And there's a raft of different things you could do there. The other thing that I would use to track and monitor players' athleticism is their efficiency and effectiveness in their footwork. So we have a footwork cycle, which is start, move, hit, recover. There's a variety of different ways that you can start. Again, I could do, in fact, I did a course last week where we did 2 days just on the footwork. So we could spend hours speaking about that. But there's a variety of different ways you can start. But of course, we're looking mostly at the athletic way. First, athletic first step, drop step when they need to. In terms of movement, how much do they chew up the court? Are they taking unnecessary strides, like I call it Flintstone footwork? Or are they effectively chewing up the court with good stride patterns, being able to change direction on a dime, being able to do a variety of different things in the hitting phase with the legs whenever they tactically need to do them. So we look at athletic norms. If you've seen some of the stuff that I'm doing on Instagram, you'll see some of the clips I'm putting up where I'm showing how well someone can move using different steps. So I've got one example here from Brenda Fruitova, who is from the Czech Republic and won La PTA in February and is 12 years old. So she's 2 more years left in that age group. And her athleticism, her flow around the court is unbelievable. So have a look at this clip. So in slow motion, you'll see this. So she'll do a crossover step after the return. So a little hop there. Crossover step with an effortless glide, kind of shuffle step, bang, and can just change. So there's a technique to that as well as a physicality. But for me, 12-year-olds can cover a big chunk of the court. The difference is going to be what they do at the end of it. So you'd be amazed if you take a 12, 13-year-old, give them the footwork pattern, put a throw down line where they reach, try and get them to beat that, be more explosive, change direction quicker. It's not massively different from the pro level. The big difference, of course, is what they do with the ball when they get there. It's not as powerful, of course. Oops. So, going into the performer, one of the questions that was sent in before I think it was sent in yesterday or the day before, was around this: when do you address the mental aspects of tennis? For me, whether we like it or not, or we're aware of it or not, they're always there, so we're always working on them. The danger is if we don't give it due attention, then things could start to fester or go down a different road. But the reason I call it performer versus mental, there's still a stigma associated with somebody if they need a sports psychologist. It's still there. Any sports psychologist worth their salt will tell you they would much prefer to be prehabbing than rehabbing. So we have a duty as coaches to lay a foundation of strong qualities, mentally, emotionally, with attitudes, with kind of creating strong values on a daily basis. But we can also track this, and this is where it is a little bit more subjective. So if I talk about work ethic, it literally is what it is. It's their work rate in training on the match court. Now, this is what I alluded to right at the start. By simply saying to a player, I want you to mark yourself out of 10 for what you consider to be your work rate when you train and or versus your match court. So even that process is worthwhile doing, because they go, right, yeah, I'm a 7 out of 10. Instantly what they're saying is they could work harder. You could butter it up and say, well, why not a 6? And they go, well, a 6 is like, that would be lazy. I do work hard, so you can layer it in and help them feel better about themselves, because some people will score themselves lower than what you believe. And some coaches will score the players higher because they think it's like, yeah, my player works really, really hard all the time. We need to be honest and reflect and think about what work ethic looks like for a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old. A lot of people believe that work ethic is like, you can beast them, you can like do depletion drills all the time. Work ethic does not have to be volume and intensity and crushing them and till they drop, till they throw up. That's not work ethic. Work ethic is, for me at this age, like doing your kind of due diligence, if you like, putting in the right amount of focus and attention to the right things and doing them to the best of your ability. To use a cliched expression, which I think cliches are truths, it's you do your best to be your best. If you could click your fingers and get all your players to do their best, to be their best, we'd all have players of a higher level. So it's our job to help create environments that foster that value, but we need to monitor it, and we can do it through all those drills, all the core drills, the match core. It's ever present. It's not, we're going to do a session on work ethic today. It's not, we're going to send you to the sports psychologist because you're lazy. We are responsible for creating environments that foster good work ethic and attention to detail. The excellence, for me, is the kind of quality control that you bring. So again, they got to mark themselves out of 10, and I put some example kind of components, which would be how well they prepare for training and match play. Are they the ones that, they come on the court and after the first drill, they're like, I forgot to fill my water bottle up? Are they the ones that have a 3-hour camp and they don't pack any snacks? They expect somebody to go and get them for them. Those things are these attitudes of excellence. Do they take a change of clothes when they need it? Do they pack a towel? Do they have a change of grip? Do they have a reel of string when they go to the tournament? All these kind of little things you can start to get them to understand as part of having this attitude of excellence on a daily basis. The other things we've got already within the drills: beat the bounce, winning the recovery, how resilient they are. So and I put bounce forwards ability. I don't like the word back. You don't bounce back, you bounce forwards. In tennis, you never go backwards. You always got the next point, game, set, match, tournament. So how well do they bounce forwards? Do they take the defeats or the feeling of injustice or the whatever? Do they actually turn it around and become this resilient performer? Determination across the board, never giving up. You've got a million different categories you could create to get them to mark themselves out of 10. Desire to improve is the constant that you will find in any successful person, whether it be in business, sport, or industry, in the arts. They all have this constant desire to develop themselves in any way they can. And the reality is, as we all know, the higher the level, the more the marginal gains, if you like to use that expression. So we can get the player again to mark themselves at a 10, we can mark them at 10. But again, it's the little things that will give us the feeling of, are they curious? Are they compliant? Because it kills me. It sounds a bit strange, but I don't want to work with a compliant person. I want them to give a little bit back. If I do something, I want them to have the courage to say, actually, why don't we do it like this? Or can we do something else now? We've worked this for too long. Or argue that they don't want to do something because they have a better rationale for it. The common trait in a lot of great performers is they're stubborn. So we need to embrace that and understand how curiosity, stubbornness, whether they're studying away from the core, are they on if they're 13, or let's say they're 12 and they've not played a Tennis Europe event, are they on the Tennis Europe calendar to see where the tournaments are, what the rankings like, who is the number one, how many points do I get if I win say a grade 3 first round versus a grade 1 first round? Those are the things that we can use. Back in, I'm going to say our day, for some of you that are my age, it would have been the tennis magazines, my posters. I'm constantly studying tennis. So if somebody had said to me at 15, 16, mark yourself out of 10 for desire to improve, I would have been a 9 or a 10 all day long, because I just love learning still to this day. They could use journaling, and I put in here helping others. For me, that is also a sign of a player's mentality to getting better for themselves, is if they're willing and able to help others. Because whether we like it or not, and parents don't particularly like this, that we need to want the best for our peers and our friends in our tennis group. That raises the bar. And at the moment, there's too many juniors that don't want the best. They want easy wins. They want to win in practice, even if it means their partner hitting the ball in the middle of the net. We don't need that. So that could be another indication for you as a coach that you can mark down. Yeah, this person is almost becoming a bit of an assistant coach here, because they want the levels to be up so much higher. And I said at the start, the most important component of all for me is the person. We cannot get away from this idea. I've spoken to so many people from so many different walks of life attached to tennis and sport about this whole thing of happiness and health. And there's not one person in the world that I believe could consciously say out loud, no, I don't believe that happiness and health are important. Of course, if they're happy and they're healthy, they will learn quicker, learn more often, work harder, be more motivated. They'll bounce back, or bounce forwards from adversity. They will help each other. They'll be in a much better place. So for me, that's the absolute number one thing that a parent should just be keeping a track of, is how happy are they in themselves? Are they enjoying their training? How healthy are they physically and mentally? We're in an age now where mental health is finally out there. It's a big thing. One thing I can guarantee you, and you can reflect on it yourself, is that everyone talks about this focus and drive and focus and the single-minded determination. The reality is, no matter how focused you are, there's always stuff going on in your life. There's always stuff going on in these kids. And of course, they're at an age, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, where they could be starting to get into puberty. They might have growth spurts. They might have, things happening to their bodies that they weren't prepared for. So we have to kind of keep a handle on all those things and make sure that we don't wash over them or disregard them. And also, we've got another social thing, or this is good for parents to know. So if there's parents watching, hopefully, but if they're not coaches, we need to tell them to be mindful of this, is that when we get a kid going into, let's say, academy or high school age, there's a big switch in their brain. And the big switch is they're more influenced by their peers than they are by their parents. So if you think about kids up to 12, how much the parent is the driving force. And then when you think of them 12, 13 plus, the parents, of course, are still important. Don't think that's what I'm saying, but they're more influenced by their peers and their friends. So if we want our children to continue playing tennis, to choose to continue on the tennis journey, happiness and health are absolutely vital. The probability is they will continue to play tennis, but if they have friends who are involved, they will be most likely to continue, because they'll create friends for life through tennis. I've still got friends for life. I met up with a guy that I was best buddies with at 18. I haven't seen him for 30, almost 29, 30 years, and it was like we'd never left each other. We were just straight back to being 18. So the point that I'm making here is, it goes back to that raising the bar and wanting the best for each other. If we have a dog eat dog mentality, then what will happen is their peer group will start to resent each other, and if everyone's not happy and healthy, there's more chance of dropout. We need to place the focus on the person and making sure that they are good to go in all aspects of their well-being. So let me summarize. We've got this, I'm going to say duty. I think it's a duty to help track and monitor the development of our players. The downside of this, or the flip side of this, is that players can develop without tracking. They can develop without coaching, but we don't want to leave it to chance. We want to turbocharge it. We want to laser beam focus it and make sure that they are as likely as possible to reach whatever potential they're meant to reach. We can do it within these priority areas, which also will help motivate and focus us and the player, make us accountable as well. I'm big on coaches need to be accountable and responsible. But this is a big warning for me, and I've made my mistakes with this. Don't push all this stuff onto the kid. Think of it like the back end versus the front end of a website. We want the kids to be the front end of the website, fully functional, carefree, easily navigating, etc. The back end can be messy. That's us. We're doing all the tracking. We're doing all the kind of messy, templatey stuff or whatever. The reason I say that, I worked with a girl called Anna Brogan, who was #1 in Britain, played the junior slams, beat the #2 seed at junior Wimbledon, like 2-1, fantastic player. And I worked with her between 12 and 14, and she was so into it. She liked all the information, but after 6 months, she goes, "It's too much for me. I'm feeling it on the court. I don't want to feel it. I just want to play." But then when she was 17, 18, 19, and she went across the pond to a tennis academy, she spoke to me recently and she said, "I wish nobody was doing it. I wish that I'd had it then, or been more aware of what my responsibility was then, because at 17, 18, I was 100% ready to own my tennis and take responsibility for the kind of habits, the quality habits that she wanted to put into her daily routines." Typically, mid-teens on, I think you can start to check in and check if they are ready for that. So the big takeaway is, be mindful to not overwhelm the kids with all this stuff. We can do it because we're behind the scenes pulling the strings, but we want them to be focused on process performance, and then of course that leads to healthier outcomes. So that's pretty much it. This sweet spot in here, if you think technical with physical, this is ever present. Tactically, technically, there's overlaps. Of course, if they're physically able, they're able to do more tactically as well. Everything merges and melts into one little pot here. The person is absolutely at the forefront of everything, and it's our job to pick what we want at any given time to be the focus to track their development within that area. It doesn't have to be everything. That is me done. I think I've done pretty well in timing there. So I'm going to stop my screen and see where we're at in terms of questions. So I don't know, Cian, was there anything coming in?
Kris, I'm just going to jump in here quickly. Great job. Really great job. Very insightful. There's going to be a lot of tracking for the coaches out there to do that. Don't. But Question, how can a parent help with the tracking? What can they track that maybe a coach can't track?
Good. Well, the first thing they can do is they can track definitely the well-being of the kid. They can help us understand that, and there's certainly certain sensitive issues, especially with females when they kind of get to their cycles coming in. They can help with all that stuff. But the reality, going back to what I said earlier, is they can be fact finders for us at tournaments if they're willing and able to do it. Because they could sit there and chart first serve percentage. You could give them one thing to chart that would help give you factual information to know how things are going on the match court. And they can help big time with that. I think everything else, technically, you don't want really them messing about with that. Tactically, you don't want them messing about. You just want facts from them, and you want opinions on their state of mind, their body, their health, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because if you're a coach and you have, I don't know, between 1 and 30 players, you can't be tracking all their matches, and you can't track that. So most time at that age, the parents are at the matches.
Yeah.
And they can track whatever you tell them to track. So yeah, that's great. Let's just have a question here from Owen. When charting matches with a player that you're working with, what would be the best thing to track regularly at that age, apart from the obvious?
Is it charting matches? Did you say? Yeah. So charting matches, is it Ian or Owen? I would suggest that you almost pick one thing. So going back to what Fabio was talking about there with the parents, there's no danger you're going to get a parent to chart multiple things in a match, unless they're a tennis background. So pick one thing, and it has to be linked to the process of the performance that they need to do. So let's say, for example, you've been working on beating the bounce. You might have literally a tally mark of every time that they hit a ball like on the outside thirds, and then another column where you tally mark, did they beat the bounce? It can be as simple as that. And I think that would be my advice for anything, is try it out with one thing and just start to see the difference it makes in the clarity of the player's mind when they're so focused on that one thing, that getting behind the ball. Like, we all know it. If we could click our fingers and make all our players beat the bounce and win the recovery, we'd have way better players. Just that one thing. If we all had our players being able to have a high tempo with movement, with the change of direction, with change of arcs, we could click our fingers and make them all do that. We'd have brilliant players. So it's choosing the priority thing and just finding a way of charting it. And I chart all sorts of different things. It could be a stick man, ball 3. You're trying to get the player on ball 3 to hit the ball shoulder height when possible and power into the other corner. You have a stick man on a piece of paper. Every time it's on ball 3, you put a dot in relation to the shoulders, where it is, and at the end of the match, you give it to the player when the time is right, and you say, right, this is where you were hitting ball 3. Now, if they know that, let's imagine the player sliced the return, it doesn't even get up at shoulder height, but you might circle the ones where you think they could have taken it at shoulder height. So you've got a dot at waist height with a circle around it, dot at waist height, circle, circle, circle. You go, look, you had 12 opportunities to take ball 3 at shoulder height, and you let 8 of them drop to waist height. That's factual information. And that you can train that on the practice court and then take the stats from the match court. So there's no easy way to answer it. And you choose one thing and find a way of measuring it and track that over a period of time.
Great. Thank you very much. And I will be happy with that. Next, we've Alan Beattie, our friend from over in Ireland here. Good evening, Mr. Soutar. As ever, as a brilliant presentation. I personally feel a huge amount of coaches focus way too much on technique and not nearly enough on footwork. What's your view?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a difficult one for me, this one, because sometimes when I speak the way I speak about it, people think I'm saying technique's not important. So I think I mentioned it in the presentation. Let's say it is equally as important as everything else. But if you did a pie chart of how much time people spend on technique versus other areas, most coaches would have the majority of the pie being technique. The bottom line is, as you mentioned with footwork, is your footwork allows you or facilitates your ability to use your technique. Now, a good expression I use with players a lot is use your feet to move your body around the court. So think of it like they've got their body, they use their feet to move their body around the court, and they have to space appropriately between themselves and the ball, and then do the most appropriate technique. But all the different footwork combinations you can do within the hitting phase, there's nine different things you can do within the hitting phase. But if you get coaches teaching like a model technique, what happens is the player doesn't adapt to the tactical situation and they become one-dimensional. And then what happens, ironically, is a coach sees that in the court and they think they need to work on the technique some more. So, but they don't. They need to work on the player's ability to adapt and apply their technique to a variety of different tactical situations. So footwork is a good way of actually unpacking the technique, because everything from the ground up will be either, let's say, hopefully connected in terms of releasing on a chain. But even if they don't, let's say, return a serve where they just catch it, I'm doing this on a camera in my study, but they just put the racket, wait for it and turn, you need to have that ability to know how the technique needs to adapt to different tactical situations. So for me, there's so many layers to it that in general, I think coaches do get hung up too much on having somebody technically perfect, but not able to actually adapt.
Hope that helps, Alan. Next, we've Kartrick, who asks, any more examples for players to understand hurting the mistakes concept during training?
I'm not, like, to counter what I said, I'm not a massive fan of forfeits. Like you see people do, like if you'd miss, you go do 10 press-ups and all that. I think that it needs to be more intrinsic than that. So, I do like things like, I did it with a friend this morning. It's like we take one ball out, so we don't take a basket out, we take one ball out. And if we hit it in the net, we run up and we get it. If it goes to the other court, we have to run and get it. So instantly, I don't want to make mistakes. Like, nobody wants to make mistakes, but we need to find creative ways to actually get players to focus and channel in. Of course, it could be on targets, objectives, scoring systems, and so on. But ultimately, it's an intrinsic thing. I always remember there's a coach called Karl Mize who used to work with Kleisters. And I remember when he started working for the LTA, he said that the number one quality that he looks for in a potential player is their ability to know where the court is. And he used a young girl, Jessica Wren, at the time. She won 12 and an Orange Bowl as well, 2006. And he was using her as like, if you look, doesn't matter where you put her in the court, she understands where she is and where the court is. And she'll put the ball wherever she needs to limit the amount of trouble she can be in the next ball. So I think we have to put a lot of attention onto what they're trying to do with the ball versus worrying about trying to come up with too many fancy things to make it hurt. But it needs to hurt in here when you make a mistake, in my opinion.
Agree, completely agree with you there. We've a question from Duncan next. Would you tell the player what the parent or coach is tracking before the match, or just reflect after?
Well, like I said, Duncan, ideally you want players, even at 10 years old, to get used to, before they go on the court, write down, even if it's just one thing. So today I am going to focus on this. Now, that hopefully will be linked to what they've been working on in the coaching court with you. So there's no problem with that, as long as it's an agreed thing that the player has said, right, I'm going to focus on this. The problem comes where, and I've done it myself, is where I tell the player, I'm going to be charting X, Y, and Z. They've had no say in it. I've just told them. And then I'm in their head, like I've chosen 3 areas that they've not chosen. And they know that I am, in their mind, judging them from the side of the court with my pen and paper. And they've performed awfully. So it needs to be agreed. I definitely wouldn't be getting the parents to tell them before the match. But the bottom line is, if you want to evaluate something, you need to have planned to do it in the first place. So if it was one thing, let's say it was neutralize, like returning first serve deep up the middle. So it was, I'm going to focus on that today. Then at the end of the match, they give a little bit of an insight to how they feel they performed in that one area. You, if you're there, have charted it, whether it be a scatter diagram or stats or whatever. And the light bulb moment comes when you've got a disparity between the two. So they quite often will tell you something, oh, it was rubbish, it was awful, yeah, it was crap, I missed so many returns. And you say, well, how many returns did you miss? I don't know. And it happens that they maybe missed 3 in a row, but it was an important point in the match. So they remember that. But you need to educate them to eventually, longer term, track as they go along in the match. You'll know yourself when you watch professional players, like Rafa's a legend at this, where he will see patterns happening early on in a match and then play in such a way to stop it happening again. He is feeling, he's intuitive within the moment, but there's no danger he was born with that gift. He's learned it over time. So yeah, I think it needs to be agreed with the player, and one thing at a time to start with, and then maybe I never do more than 3 or 4. Depends on the player.
Kris, that's where our journals come in really handy.
Well, yeah,
it sounds like a sales pitch, but no, that's where it's more junior players that use them, and they can agree with their coach what they're looking into. And also we have the section where you talk about the performer, where you can rate stuff. So players can rate their game. There's a section for the coaches where they can rate stuff as well, which is a new addition. But I'm going to, before I jump into Amory's question here, you had the video of Brenda. I can't remember the surname, but I've seen her play. I've seen her the video up. She's a great player. What makes her so special? Like, how come she's so good as a 12-year-old? Is it coach, genetics, everything? What is it?
She comes from a tennis family, first of all. Her older sister won Tarbes the year before.
Okay.
There's definitely tennis in the family. I think, apart from the physical skills that she had, she was actually, like, technically, she was in the kind of extreme ends of the, like, say, the racket work was inverted on the forehand and the backhand. But she obviously times the ball well. But the biggest thing that made her different was how well she handled the occasion. It was like there was probably about 2,500 people watching that match at Tarbes in the final. And it didn't matter what happened. You wouldn't have known what the score was. Like, she won the first set 6-love. And then out of nowhere, Clervy, the American girl, started playing like lights out tennis. And then, in the third set, you're thinking Clervy's going to win. And then Brenda came back. It was just seamless emotional management, not control, emotional management throughout. She knew the right times to kind of get the fist out and be determined. I think for me, that was the thing. I came away, apart from her game, which was really good, I was like, man, it's like a mini Sharapova in terms of the mindset already, which is ironic. Well, maybe not ironic, because her older sister, Linda, is a hothead.
Oh.
So it could be, again, the environment is, I don't want to be like that because I can see, how it affects my sister. So maybe I'll learn how to be a bit more in control of my emotions.
So it comes from the environment, you're saying?
I think the environment, like, she's at Moratoglu, so her and Clerby both trained at Moratoglu, so they're friends and they played each other in the final. So I think the environment that Patrick's got there is really well-rounded. It's not extreme in any way. They're not doing crazy tennis hours, crazy physical. It's very well-rounded and also good education as well.
Great. Okay, thank you. We just a couple more questions here.
Yeah.
One is from Amory. I hope I pronounced that right. Do you have the formula for amount of hours of training, tennis specific and others, per week, per age? Do you recommend for junior athletes to play other sports? So I'm going to jump in here. There's a question also asked that if they are playing other sports, when should they really just knuckle down and focus in on tennis? So maybe you can throw that in as well.
Some of them. Number one, they should play other sports. For a variety of reasons, the transferable skills athletically. I think team sports are good for tennis players to play because they get that sense of togetherness which you can bring into the tennis environment. I think in terms of the formula for amount of hours, no, I don't have a formula, because the common one you hear is the age they're at is the amount of hours they should be on court. So if they're 12, it's 12 hours tennis. Now, a couple of things. The first one is really expensive. Tennis, if you're getting 12 hours of coaching, you've got to be pretty wealthy. So 12 hours of free play, well, I've got no issue with somebody doing that. The thing that I think has to be taken into account, going back to the health and the happiness, is there needs to be some sort of balance in their life. So if you take it, the first thing I do when I work with a parent is give them a blank Monday to Sunday timer from like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and I get them to fill out the life of that kid in a typical week. And even just doing that makes parents go, oh my God, they're doing too much. Because it might be they have various activities. It might be that they're at tournaments almost every single weekend. It might be there's a sibling there that, you know, they hadn't even thought about. Oh my God, that's 3 weekends in a row we've been with the daughter, and the son just has to tag along. So I don't like formulas. And also, we don't, I don't know where you're from, Anne-Marie, but in Scotland, and I know in Ireland it's the same thing, we don't have the luxury of creating programs that, you know, Moratoglu and Sanchez and Bollettieri do, because we don't have the facilities, we don't have the coaches, we don't have the climate, unless, you know, unless we've got heaps of indoor centres, which Scotland and Ireland don't have. I think it's a sticky wicket. So a mix of sports and making sure that they are, for a social scene, different skills they're going to transfer. The one that you mentioned, Fabio, was the age.
When should they knuckle down and specialise?
Yeah, well, obviously we're not in the perfect forum to throw it back to you saying, what do you think? But if I was face to face to you, based on what I said in the presentation, when do they choose? You know, they choose, like most kids, when they get to those early teens, they choose what they want to do. So, and I did a Zoom thing a few weeks ago with a few coaches from around the world, and we were trying to agree this. When do you think they could be like, place tennis at the tip of their activities and focus on that? And we were all agreed around that early teens. You know, if you look back at the like Federer's, Andy, you know, all these kind of players, they all did something else, and they all seemed to focus on tennis when they were about 13, 14. And then to throw throw another layer on that, I believe that, let's say, performance is when you put tennis to the front of all your other things, and high performance is when you put your tennis to the front of everything. You know what I mean? Quite often to the detriment of other areas, social life, relationships, you know, quite often your well-being. You know, you just go all in, you become obsessed with it. So I think that's where, I think early teens, they can start to choose.
Great, thank you. Just two more questions. One is, do you urge kids to watch professional tennis? Fewer kids seem to watch tennis these days.
Yeah, there's an irony there, isn't there, Ashik?
Well, that's all I do. I encourage, that's my job.
There's a huge irony for various different reasons. But the first one is, when I was a kid, I'm 47, there was hardly any tennis on TV. You would get Wimbledon, then you would get maybe the US Open final, you might get Davis Cup every now and again. And I would video these matches and I would burn the tape. I would just literally rewind it and watch it so much until the tape went. Tennis has never been more readily available for kids to watch. And I don't think there's probably never a period of time where kids have watched less tennis. Now, the thing that winds me up about that is, of course, they should watch it because they can learn, but it's another thing that you could use to monitor or just like keep a track on how much they want to learn. You know, how into it are they? Now, I've had quite strong debates with people about this, but I do think it's an indication. And it kills me when I get kids that are good level, like national, international juniors. They don't watch tennis on TV. They don't play football, but they come in and they know even the press conference that Mourinho did the day before. You know, so football, they watch that and they keep up to date with that. But the sport they actually put at the front of their priorities, they don't watch it. So I think that there's tons of benefits to it. Like you're saying, imitating technique. That's how, you know, role modeling is perfect for kids, isn't it? It's like, when I was a kid, I'll be Boris Becker today, I'll be John McEnroe, I'll be Ivan Lendl. Then if you serve and volley like Boris Becker does, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake, because it wasn't you, it was Boris. You know, that's how we learned. Kids in the streets pretending to be Pele, Maradona, Ronaldo, Messi, you know, they practice the things they do because they watch them on TV, and we need to get, well, we don't need to do it. It would just would be nice if kids are into tennis and like to watch tennis as well.
Great. And finally, from Aaron King here, advice for helping juniors maintain balance during difficult times in the match. How do you manage the players' anger, excitement, disappointment, and praise them during a match?
Well, I think if I hook back to what they're focused on, I've got to see if I can read that question. Where was that? Just so I get all the bits.
Sorry, it just came in to me.
All right.
So just advice for helping juniors maintain a balance during difficult times in the match. So if you're the parent or the coach on the end of the court, how do you do a poker face? What do you do?
I think, well, if they see you relaxed, they'll be more relaxed, first of all. But there's a good 3 R's to remember, which is, let's say, some people say react and some people say release. I think release is a more proactive word than react. There's review and there's reset. So let's imagine that you've sat down with them, they've agreed one thing before the match. Who was it that asked the question? Right, Aaron.
It was Aaron, yeah.
Yeah. So Aaron, if you've agreed one thing with your player before the match and you want them to be focused and evaluating that, and things don't go well and they miss a big point, it might even be the thing that they've been working on, it's okay for them to release. It's okay. So one of the expressions I don't like in junior tennis is emotional control. If somebody doesn't look like they show any emotion, you would get a psychiatrist involved. Kids, humans, we need to show emotion and we need to feel that we can release it. So the key thing is, if you take that 20-second or 25-second cycle that we have, that they can release, and they can release within 1-2 seconds. Then they can start to go into the review. What happened? Was it really that bad? What will I do next time, etc. And then they reset for the next point. So in terms of what you want them to do, you want them to be releasing, reviewing, kind of resetting, and that get into that cycle. And you know, you could argue, is it good for them to look at you and so on? But you need to walk the talk, and the parents need to walk the talk. So if you're saying to the player, you need to be relaxed and focused, you need to be relaxed and focused as well. And that's why I get parents to quite often, the ones that I get to chart matches are the ones that are the worst supporters. So they're the ones that are animated and emotional in the scenes. I give them the piece of paper and say, chart one thing, even if it's one thing that isn't relevant. You know, they don't know it, but I would just say, chart this one thing. So what happens is, you've told the kid, I want you to be focused on a process. They look up at the mums and dads, focused on a process. But if you've said, I want you to focus on this process and performance, and they look off the court and mum and dad are giving it all this and emotional, whatever, they will come out of that focus and then refocus on something. What's mum thinking? Oh, dad's going off his head. Oh, they're disappointed. Or, oh, we've got 3-hour drive to get home. And, you know, they're just going to be nipping my head all the way. You know, that's what I mean about, there's always stuff going on. So we can't live in this world where we think people should suppress emotions. And that's the reason I get wound up by it, is that most people's image of emotional control is emotional suppression. And emotional suppression, whether it be euphoria or despair, is a negative thing. We want people to release joy, enthusiasm, despair, just get it out, you know, shout, ding the racket if you need to. I don't advise that one, but you know, like, do something, slap your thigh, do something to get it out, and then review and refocus.
That is amazing, Kris. Really enjoyed that, and hopefully all the participants did, and it was great. And we'll have this, we'll send it around, maybe take me a day or two to host it up somewhere. We send it around. But for anybody who wants to follow Kris, I just put his Instagram username in the chat box. And also we did a podcast episode with Kris
Yeah.
We did a podcast episode with Kris a long time ago now, maybe it's nine months ago, which was really good. So people check that out. But if you have any questions, fire them away to Kris.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. We're going to have more of these, as I said, every 2 to 4 weeks. I think the next one's going to be something totally. Everyone is going to be different. We're going to just do different areas of tennis. We're going to do a stringing one. We're going to teach people different types of strings and who should be using what strings and what customizations you can do to your racket to help your game. So something different, as we're trying to cater for not only players and or parents and coaches and players as well. And I think it's handy if coaches and players know this stuff as well. So excited for that. I'll send you all an email about it once we have the date penciled in. And yeah, thanks all for joining, and super thanks to Kris. Without you, it wouldn't have happened.
Pleasure. Right. We should all thank Fabio as well. He's doing this out of the goodness of his heart. So not many people
so are you.
yeah.
So are you. But no, thanks everybody, and thank you. Bye.
Cheers.